Hey everybody, Sue Hitzman. We are here today with an amazing person in the bodywork world and also in my world. We're going to be talking a little bit about a question that I think many people in our position ask, especially those of us who do bodywork or any type of clinical practice. So today we're here to hang out with Ruth Duncan. Hi, Ruth.
Hi.
I'm so excited to be hanging out with you. And Ruth, there's so many things I want to talk to you about, and I know that I can't usurp all of your afternoon, so we're going to kind of get into this a little bit. For those of you who don't know Ruth, when did we meet? Was it at British Fascia Symposium? That wasn't the first time we met, was it?
No,
No.
I think the very first time we met was at the FRC in Washington.
Right, the Washington Fascia Research Congress. What an incredible time that was, wasn't it? That was a wonderful program. Exactly right. That is exactly where we met. And many of the people that Ruth and I both follow and I think enjoy the work of, like Jaap van der Wal, I think what a great person, what an educator, Robert Schleip, Tom Findlay, all of these great pioneers of this industry. So Ruth, let's talk a little bit about you for people who don't know who you are. You started out where in the journey? What's the question that got you? I think, what's your origin to get here?
Well, as you can hear from my accent, I'm from Scotland.
I was going to
And
say New York. Ha ha ha. I'm only kidding. Sorry.
and I guess I always felt that in Europe we were a little bit further behind the US. And I feel kind of fortunate because I've bridged both sides of the Atlantic. I actually did my massage training in Florida. I lived in the US, came home to Scotland, and I was kind of gung-ho, I suppose, when I first started almost 25 years ago. And I was like, well, massage can do this and massage can do that. And I can help you with this and I can help you with that. And then I came back to the US, did a little bit more of my myofascial release training. I'm a John Barnes myofascial release therapist, dipped my toe in various different things. And as I continued through my learning and through my experience with my clients, I still kept coming back to the same question: is what am I doing? What happens when I touch this person? What is the actual scientific evidence of the outcomes that I'm seeing? Is it
Right.
simply placebo, or is there more to it? And what is that more? And I just couldn't find any answers.
Well, I guess that's the other part of it, is what in the hell do we mean by placebo? I mean, here's the thing, people.
Mm.
What do you think would help you in a time of overstressed or angst? Somebody punching you in the face or somebody giving you a hug, right? So I think that touch, we know on all levels, is about how we're touched. And what does touch then do to us? Well, we know if we're touched inappropriately, that can do a lot of things psychologically, physically, emotionally to us. And then this more healing touch, what is that healing? I think that you're right. Science can only define so much about what a therapist believes or perceives when they're working on someone, these ideas of, well, when I put my hands on someone, I feel tissue softening, I feel this, I feel that. And then, okay, and then what is it that's causing that sensation, right? Is it the nervous system reacting to touch? Is there something that's happening because of the touch, right? What's the pathway? So I think you're right. And so Ruth, in your practice, let's talk about this idea of self myofascial release. Could we start at the fascial part for you of your practice? Right, because you said, okay, if I'm hearing you right, you went from massage and then got into the John Barnes practice. And for those people who don't know about John Barnes, can you give me like a quick, how you would describe John Barnes's practice, the method that he created, and the followers that share this? How would they describe it?
I do consider myself incredibly lucky that I met John when I did. It was the right time in my life for me because it taught me to bring my skills to an incredibly holistic approach. For me, my fascial release, and I'm very convinced that this is the way John intends it to be taught, is that it is not just about what you do with your hands, it's about how you communicate with the person you're working with. There's a massive holistic approach there. It's not just a technique, it's a full approach. And I think the phrase was, I can teach you 10 techniques, you'll only have 10 techniques, but if I teach you an approach, your techniques are limitless. And
Right.
that's what myofascial release is. It is a limitless approach where the person you're working with is always at the center of your care. And I've really tried throughout my entire practice to maintain that. So it's a very holistic, hands-on approach. There are controversies with it. There's questions over it. What are we actually doing? Are we really affecting fascia? Does fascia stretch? Do we release it? Do we melt it? What do we do with it? There's always those questions.
Right, and there is one of the things that Ruth and I have had the honor of chit-chatting with Ruth a few times, and I think there's always, for me, a question about definitions, how we define something. What the hell is it that we're even talking about in the first place, right? So when we say fascia, and we can be very generic and say it's a connective tissue, right? Fascia connects everything in the body. And so, okay, that's why they call it connective tissue. But we now understand fascia. How are we defining it? Are we defining it as an organ, right? Robert Slipe is saying, hey, 250 million sensory nerves or nerve endings living in fascia. Could it be an organ of communication? I think so. Okay, but hang on a second. What about its architecture and that biotensegrity concept? And now it's a system, right? So is fascia a tissue, an organ, or a system? And I think here's the problem, is that I think it's all three. And that's a problem for science. And it's also a problem in the industry of therapy, because people sometimes use cellular terms while they're actually defining macro level concepts, and they're making the jump too fast. They're taking the cellular terminology, not really understanding what that is. What is the extracellular matrix? How are cells producing the goo, right? Okay. And then how is it functioning as like a ligamentous, dynament, cohesive, reactive system to movement, right? So and this is something, okay, like here's where we're gonna hopefully come up with an answer here. Self-myofascial release. I personally, in my understanding as a curious neurofascial science and researcher of my own accord to study this concept of fascia, like, does fascia release? What does that even mean? What is that word release? Is this a weird word? Can we use a new word, Ruth? Do we need a new word? Because you're a myofascial person. Tell me.
Yeah, there's already a little bit of a push, and the late Leon Chita is a marvelous man. I think if I remember right, he's got a blog post that says "What's in a Name," and he is friends with Andre Pilat from Spain, and Andre Pilat has written these massive, thick volume books, volume 1 and volume 2, through Handspring, called Myofascial Induction, because he believes that you're inducing change in the fascia, you're not releasing anything. Now, am I okay with that? I feel like it sounds like I'm plugging my client into an electrical socket, to be fair, when I call it myofascial induction. I then have to go, okay, are we releasing? Are we inducing? And are we actually doing anything to the myofascial system? And I prefer to think about this another way, and I'll tell you why. When I was just starting, I just left school and I started my nursing career. And I can remember as a very young student nurse going into the wards where we had to do handover and shifts. And I was in a children's ward at the time. And when we went round the children and we were all sitting in the staff room, the staff nurse hands out and says, bed number 2's got this, bed number 4's got this, bed number 5's got this. You never knew the children's names. You just knew them by bed number and what was wrong. And I feel very strongly that when we do myofascial release, what do we do? We're not doing something to the myofascia. We're working with the person who has issues. So we're
not even working on the dysfunction. We're working on the person to resolve it.
Yeah. It's the person we're treating, we're working with, whatever term you want to use. It's not the myofascia, it's not the frozen shoulder, it's not the plantar fasciitis, it's that person, that holistic organism in front of you that's wonderful. That to me is really valuable, and I feel it's lost when we use terms.
Agreed. That's a really beautiful way to say it too. And I think what we're doing is we're creating an absence of connection. And if what we're working on is the connective system, it seems to me that we do need to tune in. I like the idea of induction, but then again, here's another question for you, Ruth. Do you feel that when you work with people, are you on the idea that you're doing, and maybe we should define this, like I can speak for myself as a cranial person, I was taught first, palpate, don't manipulate, feel and follow, don't initiate. Just find your frequency. And then I know that this is me. I put my hands on my body. I may have melted my hands and feet, right? And then I put my hands on my client and I just begin to observe. I'm an observer observing them. And in that, I am now communicating with them on a frequency that's not up in here for me. It is part of my sensory system. And again, if fascia is an actual neuroelectrochemical superconducting highway, as it may be, if it's a communication network, isn't that point of induction? It's like a plug-in, my energy, your energy, there's a linking, a frequency. And so now it becomes very, not only client-based, but also therapist-based. So for you, when you work on your clients, whether it's self-myofascial release or self-myofascial induction, as a myofascial release clinician, who also has like gobs of other education that you infuse in what you do, what do you feel your process is through touch that without science telling you what you're doing, what do you feel your intention is as a therapist?
Yeah, there's that wonderful connection that you make with a client. And to me, that's gold. That's absolute gold if you can make that. I remember way back in massage school, they said to us, you know, I had to learn how to move around the treatment couch before we actually, we call them couches in the UK, you call them tables. I had to learn to walk around the treatment couch without anybody on it before we could actually touch, because it's almost like you had to learn to dance around the couch. And I believe that that is something that you do as a therapist. When you're working with somebody, you make that connection. And I love the analogy that when you put your hands on, imagine there's no skin boundary. There's no boundary between your skin and their skin. It's like your hands are melting into syrup in their body. And I, you know, try and think of it scientifically as well. We've got mirror neurons, you've got default mode network, you've got that lovely touch that is to do with homunculus. Are we actually using the client that's in front of us as expanding our own repertoire of our body map? Do they become, in the same way somebody who's blind has a white stick, they have the white stick, it becomes part of their body schema. The person playing tennis, the racket becomes part of their body schema. Do we do the same with our clients so as that we're mapping what's going on in them in us? You know, great possibilities, but I have no idea how we can suggest or improve that.
Let's go ahead and make a nice scientific double-blind dual placebo. You know, I mean, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It can't. I mean, maybe someday there will be a way, but then again, what are we measuring, right? I guess that's the question of measurement. So let's talk a little bit about measurement, Ruth, because we, you know, you're on this kind of journey, it seems, for a long while to answer the question, what is it that happens when I put my hands on a person with the intention to support this person's healing journey and get them to a place where they feel better, right? That's our, you know, overreaching. I think all body workers, we're here to try to help our clients move forward in their lives and feel better, right? Okay, so whatever that is, the hands-on practice that you do. Now, again, what's happening inside the body? So Ruth, COVID happens, and hey, everybody, a lot of you guys like kind of hung out thinking you were on a long extended vacation and you were enjoying yourselves, or you were thinking this was going to end in a couple of weeks and you missed a bit. Ruth, you went back to school and you got a BA in health sciences while everybody else was hanging out. Tell me a little bit about what happened in this process, because what an accomplishment. And of course, it goes without saying, I am so proud of you. But seriously, I mean, wow. Tell me a little bit about this.
Well, at the time, it was a really good idea. And I thought, yeah, it started just before COVID, actually. I finished my final 2 years through COVID. And I didn't get a BA, I got a BSc, so it's a sciences
Ah,
degree.
sciences.
And yeah, and I actually had half a degree already, but never went back and finished it. And I decided that, I just needed to start at the beginning. I needed to start afresh. I needed to learn what was current because, when I could have gone to university when I was 17 and 18, there wasn't in any way the amount of emphasis and research and
Of course.
evidence practice as there is now. So,
Yeah.
in a way, it's been beneficial that I didn't do it until I was in my 50s, because it's now current. And I've got my final two modules in my year 3. One was a neuroscience, which I was thoroughly looking forward to the whole degree, then realised how complicated it was.
Mm.
And my last module was evidence-based practice in healthcare. So I was reading legislation, policy guidance, which fitted in perfectly with understanding the guidance and policy we had here in the UK for our profession during COVID.
Gotcha.
Uh, I then went on after that. I literally finished my degree, and within a month, I had signed up for a postgrad with the University of South Australia in pain science. So Lorimer Mosley was one of my lecturers. I had Mark Cately, Tasha Stanton, and there was lots of phenomenal people I was introduced to and had teaching some of the pain science and theory that I got from them too. Blew my mind, and yeah, definitely made me realize there's more to it that I still don't understand.
Yeah, yeah. I would say every year that I get older, I think to myself, my gosh, I'm actually getting less intelligent. But you know what I mean? Because I realize I don't know so many things, and there's not
Yeah.
enough hours in the day. Like I want to, water my plants and go meditate, and it's like, well, maybe I should be reading a little more. Okay, so now we have this again. You are this curious human who is trying to say, I really want to understand and share my education with others. I've been doing this, and here I want to learn really what is happening through touch, through change. And I'm always talking about the neurofascial system. I say to myself, look, your nervous system, 100% of the time, your nervous system is running pretty much the whole show. And what a freaking amazing thing that is, isn't it? Is that 98 point some odd percent of what happens to me in a day has nothing to do with my consciousness at all. I'm living in a form that is changing and adapting all of the time, healing itself. Thank you for always doing that. And living for me, regardless of all of the ridiculous things I'm sure I do, and anybody else listening probably also does too. So when we start hearing things about fascial release techniques or fascial adaptations, Ida Rolf's idea that there was plastic deformation, permanent deformation through compression, which we kind of know, well, that probably is not what's happening. So where is the crossover for you? Because I think this is something that we really have a bit really in common, is this idea that it's like a power couple in your body, that the nervous system, we really do need to understand more, because a body that's very stiff could go under anesthesia and go completely limp and their posture realigns, right? But the second they come back up, it goes right back to that shape. What's causing its return to the shape? Is it the brain or is it the tissue that didn't change during anesthesia? My theory is that fascia's got a role in the nervous system's functionality because it is the environment with which it lives. So talk to me a little bit about your concepts of fascia. What do you think fascia is doing? And how do you feel now that you've taken some of this education of Lorimer's work? How can you infuse the two and help people understand the link between fascia and the nervous system and where we might need more research?
Um, you know, one of the biggest things for me is actually reframing what we say when we talk about fascia. When we talk about fascia stores trauma, or fascia has dysfunction, or densification and fibrosis,
Mhm.
and we talk about pain science. Why can't we talk about wellness science?
Mhm.
Why can't we talk about fascia as a protective mechanism instead of just saying it's dysfunctional?
Right on.
You know, so when, like you mentioned there, when somebody's under anesthetic, their body goes limp. When they're woken up again, their body creates this pattern. What if we consider that that pattern is the way the body is protecting because of the reactions and responses of how it interacts with the world and its history? It is not possibly a dysfunction. It is actually doing something to the best of its ability to protect us. And I try and reframe that for my clients, whether it's self-myofascial release I'm doing, or whether it's myofascial release, or whether it's just talking to them.
That's
I think
right.
we've got to walk away from this negative language.
Right. And
Me, that's
that's yeah, that's an important piece of it. I always say, when you do dissections, everybody's always looking at what's wrong in the body. And I'm like, you really got to look at all this stuff that's right, that got it to this age in this kind of condition. Isn't it amazing? Right. I mean, it really is colossal. So, when you're speaking to clients and, again, I 100% agree with your thought processes. We want to talk about the wellness, the well-being of a body. We have all these sciences to explain pain, but can we also help explain better wellness, right? How can we catch what I call them pre-pain signals, right? Before you ever have actual pain, your neurofascial system is actually off-gassing signs to you all the time. There's blinking lights and detours that we are not paying attention to. We ignore the signs. We assume it's, a come and go thing because life is so impermanent. But sometimes things come and they stay. And now there's this mishap. And so I agree with you. It's not so much, I don't think, fascial dysfunction. If it's a protective response, can we now go to that point of the nervous system to say, and again, I'm going to the basics of neuroscience, you're calm, you're fine, everything is okay, you're safe, and let's just start there. In this moment, you're safe because your brain doesn't know the difference between past, present, or future. So if you're thinking processes that are negative and in this history, you actually can give yourself stress in the present moment. And so what we're learning in neuroscience is how to back people up into calm and then do things that also further support that sense of ease. And, that's where I think this more gentle approach, touch, is so important. That's what I've learned. And of course, for me with Melt, this is my, process of that. And in your practice that you have now understanding more about the neuroscience, how do you feel that's changed your practice? Especially if you're saying, hey, maybe it's a protective response. Are you now exploring the protective response? Like what do you think it's protecting? Or are you supporting its natural ability to protect? Like where is your thinking in that crossroad?
Yeah, I really start to describe to clients the way that current neuroscience is taking us in our bodywork professions. I'm trying to really get them to understand that pain is a protective mechanism, that what they're feeling, their stiffness, a fantastic paper by Tasha Stanton, Lorimer Mosley about stiffness, that the feeling of stiffness is a perception. It doesn't necessarily correlate to actual tissue stiffness.
Right.
So if the feeling of being stiff is a protection, pain is a protection, it's not that there's a problem. We have to educate, to a degree without putting the client off, because some people just don't want to know, they just want fixed. So you're trying to drop things in as you treat them, as you work with them. But I always do a full body approach. And I say, do you know what? Everything works together. So what I'm going to try and do is help your body feel more comfortable, feel easier, so that you actually can use your body in a much better way. I
So
try
Ruth,
to avoid these claims, but it's hard. It's really hard.
so you had said, because these are always good things when our guests say things like this. So you said pain, again, look, people, pain is a good thing, right? It's your brain's way of letting you know something's not right. How we now deal with the pain signal, I always say, it's like your fire alarm's going off because your toaster's on fire. Many people walk over to the fire alarm and take the batteries out, but the toaster's still on fire, right? So we're now saying, hey, if we perceive tension, that's what you're saying, like I perceive tension, but if they test my tissue, there may not be any additional tissue stiffness in that area that can be perceived with an indentometer or some fMRI, whatever they're doing. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, there's no positive correlation between an increase in tissue stiffness and feeling of stiffness. In fact, the feeling of stiffness has a negative correlation. So feeling of stiffness increases, but actual stiffness is not there. It's the opposite.
But how are we defining stiffness? Because this is important, people, because here comes, if all of a sudden you just think stiff like harder, what they're doing, science is defining stiffness as a tissue's resistance to adapt when stress is applied. Am I correct to say this?
Yes. And it's this is where you have a patient reported outcome measure, you have a PROMS or subjective response. So we have to take that with a pinch of salt, because everybody's perception is going to be different. So it has to be standardized in a certain way. So if somebody says, I feel stiff, you might just give them instead of a visual analog scale for pain, you might use the same for stiffness. You then have to correlate and use that in statistical evidence. But you have to acknowledge and accept that my perception of when I feel stiff is totally different to yours or to everyone else here. And that's the challenge. So you're having to constantly listen to what is the relevant thing for the client as to what they feel, because one client is going to be totally different to the next one.
Right. And again, guys, I think that this is always going to be a problem to go from science to just perception, right? That a lot of things are just very difficult to scientifically measure. It doesn't mean something's not happening. Clearly something is happening. But our perception of things, like, right, what we attend to, we tend to attune to, right? So if we attend to calming the body, our body will attune more to that calmer state. If we are attending to a lot of stressful situations in our lives and we're very high wired and our voice is getting very high, we might then have a little bit of trouble with regulation overall. So do you find that with clients who have a pain perception or a tension compression mismanagement perception, how would you then help us to explain, I guess, how to not feel that way? Or are you saying that it might not be a bad thing that they feel tension, or is you know what I mean? I get, this is, here comes language, right?
Right. It is definitely language, it's definitely semantics, and it's about using the words that are relevant to the client. So I think we have to acknowledge that everybody's awareness and their perception of pain and tension is completely unique. So if you go back to the analogy of using the dimmer switch, the dial, there are times in life which can change hourly, never mind daily, where somebody's sensitivity in their body is turned up. So it's high for various different reasons. So that could increase their perception of stiffness and pain, but actually there's very little change in the actual tissues, the soft tissues. So it's the nervous system that's being sensitized. So you have to acknowledge the client will tell you, I feel pain, I feel stiffness. That is real to them. You can't turn around and say it's all in your head. it is absolutely 100% real. So when I'm working with the body, I'm always constantly getting feedback. Does this feel like I'm doing the right thing? Does this feel like it's the right pressure? I'm trying to improve my therapeutic outcome with any technique that I have in my toolbox that meets the needs of that client, because they have to walk away feeling that I've not just listened to them, but I've heard them. And using right language that matters to them.
Yeah, I mean, well, first, of course, if we're going to help somebody, my gosh, we need to become good listeners. Local listening also with your hands is a skill. I mean, it really takes practice to keep your focus directly on what is happening with this person in front of you for an hour or whatever it is the time that you take. So Ruth, let's talk a little bit about these terms that I think in the fascial community has a little bit of, again, the quandary of what really is the definition of fascia. Is it a tissue, an organ, or a system? When we use words like release or unwinding, that's one that I think gives the idea of woo-woo, because that's where you sort of started a little bit of this. Is if we're ever going to help the community of the fascial world, the bodywork world, the physical touch practice for healing arts, how do we increase the science part of the arts so that we have more hands-on therapy?
Yeah. Sometimes I feel I sit on the fence when it comes to the language of myofascial release and unwinding, because your client is going to come in and say, I need my shoulders released. That's the word they're going to use. So I can't turn around and say, well, we don't actually release your shoulders. So I think there's a very slight difference between using terminology that makes sense to the layperson versus trying to be a little bit more accurate with using the terms that reflect what we think we're actually doing as a therapist in the scientific and healthcare community. I don't feel that the word release is appropriate as a teacher when I'm trying to write articles or trying to get information across to other therapists. But as a therapist to a client, I'm still going to use the word release if that's what matters to them, and use the word unwinding. Unwinding, I feel, is a very generic term. I don't think what's associated to what therapists think is unwinding is just that one term. I think there's lots of different words that reflect different styles, but very generically, the term unwinding talks to the unraveling of the feelings, the body, the emotions, perhaps past stressful events. It feels like it's unwinding the tension built up from lots of different things, and that to me does make sense.
And wait, so you're saying that you feel, do you feel emotional posturing is a thing, like that your emotions can actually cause physical adaptations in your body? The way
I
that I
don't
think could actually adapt my body?
I don't think you can separate the two, and I think this again is back to the language, the understanding. We talk about body mind. They really are not separate. They are the organism, the human that has the emotions, the human that has the way they stand, the way they sit, the way they walk. Their whole character and personality is represented in their body. So I don't think you can separate them. But I do think emotions, and we do have some science that suggest emotions can affect the tissues as much as we have it vice versa. I don't think the separation, and so many people talk about, I treat the body and body workers, just that term, body workers. Do we not treat the whole person? Are we not holistic therapists? Should we not think about that? You switched your mic off.
There was a guy mowing the lawn, and it's like it was so loud here, and I forgot to unclick it. Hang on a second. So let's go back to this. Hang on. So when we think of the terms that we're trying to use, myofascial release, um, because even on your website, your website says self or myofascial release therapy, and it's a term, right? So terms are used, terminology is used, and then I think we get into kind of camps where the terms are being used, but then people will argue, well, where's the science? Like, what's really happening? So we have a theory of self-myofascial release or myofascial release from a therapist, which to me, I also think are very different techniques. As much as we say, oh, this is a technique that simulates manual therapy, but how you're now using the tool, how do you get it to feel like it does when a therapist works on you? Which again, I think is always yielding the opportunity to slow down, use a softer touch, use a more focused touch rather than, aimlessly ironing yourself like a shirt and thinking you're winning an award for, flattening out some tissue that has a knot in it. Anyway, I digress. So let's talk a little more about this, because when we in John Barnes, what I know of, I'm not a John Barnes practitioner, but of course I've read books and I have had copious amounts of John Barnes techniques. Many of the therapists will kind of find two body parts, oftentimes an arm and my ribs, or my ribs and my hips, or my spine and my legs, two hands on me, causing a subtle bit of tension in two directions, and they'll just sit there for what could be 10 minutes. Sometimes it feels like, but it's probably more like 3. And in that, I can't say in the moment, I feel like I can feel, certain aspects of my body relax because I'm trying to breathe and I'm sort of in that mindset. I'm giving myself 1 hour with assistance to tune into something changing in the compression sense of my body. My body feels compressed. I want to feel relaxed. Okay, so I think open, lengthened. So that's what they do, long held pulls for a period of time in different areas. You may or may not feel any big changes there, but it seems like over the course of another couple of days, I do seem to feel better than I did before I walked in that door. Now, do you think that some of that is just that one moment in time could adapt the nervous system in a way where it can alter my perception of what I then feel afterwards?
Oh, that's the big question. That is the big question. I did my first part of my PMI or Rolfing training with Tom Myers many years ago, and he came up to me at the end and he said, "So, how do you think there's a difference between what we do and what you learned with Barnes?" I was like, "Well, I'm not even going to go there. I am not going down that rabbit hole."
Yeah, it's kind of like saying, what do you like better, baked beans or a car or drive in the park? It's like, I don't even know what we're talking about, right? There's such a difference in so much of it that it really is like you'd have to pick it apart. And so I would go the other way is, what do you feel is similar about the two?
I think the intention, the holding, the waiting, the connectedness. Do I personally feel like I am stretching fascia? At first, when I first started learning, I was like, yeah, I'm definitely doing stuff with the fascia. I'm definitely making changes because it's a biotentegral 3-dimensional system. I didn't find answers to that. Yesterday, was it yesterday? It was either yesterday or yeah, yesterday I attended a 3-hour online course from a psychotherapist who was trying to discuss trauma and fascia and how we might actually look to the fascial system to release our traumas. And when I asked her to clarify why she was saying that cortisol directly influences the fascial system, making it more solid. When I asked her, how does that happen? What is that process? And how can we release that process? she said, well, it just makes it thicker. It makes it more dense. It makes it stick together. It was like, well, how does it do
Yeah,
that?
how does it do that?
How does it do that? Cortisol is a hormone. There has to be a process of movement of cortisol into the fascia that's picked up by integrins or receptors or something.
Yeah, but I mean, also with women with estrogen, I think that there's,
Yeah,
we don't think enough about that.
yeah, I know. So I'm not 100% convinced that we are influencing fascia the way that we think we are, but I recognize that we don't have the skills, the tools, the understanding to be able to have enough evidence to suggest that we do either. But what I know we do have is some phenomenal amount of science that can actually help us understand a lot more about what we do when we touch. And that's what's interested me. That's the kind of path I've ended up going down, looking for stuff that perhaps is maybe biased because I've gone looking for stuff, I've quote mined, but I've tried to understand what's there rather than what's not there. And that to me was important.
And I wonder when we talk about adaptation, I think what changed a lot for me was when I kind of went down the rabbit hole in 2007 after the Fascia Congress, and I saw Gumberto's video, and I thought to myself, I don't know anything in my repertoire at all really about the cellular components of the fluids in the fascial system that allow collagen to be a fibril. And when he said fibril, it all kind of clicked for me that we are constantly looking for fiber adaptations, but we aren't studying enough the fluid adaptations, which are certainly happening. And I am certain we just need more research of this, but I can tell you that when clients move better, their tissue has better compliance. Hang on one second. This guy's coming back with the lawnmower. Wait a minute. Yeah, just give this a minute. These fucking guys drive me bananas. He just takes his time. I think he's very proud of himself. Like I have a lanai that's back here, and let me actually pause this. Anyway, uh, so I think that there's a bigger conversation here when we talk about having the argument that, well, nothing is happening in the tissue. I think that there's too much focus on what's happening in a fibrous deformation, and we're not studying enough the impact of the fluid adaptations, because within those fluids, as I'm to understand, is hyaluronin and the glycoaminoglycans that need to pump and move and kind of carry along to create the stimulation of those 250 sensory nerve endings that we were chatting about a few moments ago. And I think that value has been dismissed long enough. I think that there's a whole other concept that we must, as clinicians, figure out a way to measure. And I know we have like things like the indentometer. There are new products that are coming out that are more accurate with technology. But I think we're still just at the beginning of truly understanding the importance of that fluid perfusion through fascia. And so do you feel that when you're now taking classes and kind of directing a little more time to neuroscience, going, wow, there's like a lot over here to unpack, how do you feel your history as a truly world-renowned educator and practitioner of hands-on therapies to help practitioners become better practitioners, to focus more, to learn something new? How do you now take the neuroscience part of that and not just have a flat-out meltdown, but actually infuse it into what you do now? Because that can happen, people. Literally, your brain will short circuit. It does. So where were you after you kind of got to this point of going, okay, I've got to work now. What are we talking about? How do you do it?
We can't jump out of one frying pan and into another one. You know, it for so long it's all been about the fascia and the fascia this, the fascia that. You mentioned fascia in any therapy, and the name itself seems to profess healing qualities because it's got fascia in there. We can't leave that and jump into neuroscience, and I don't think we are ready to make that claim that it's all about the brain and the nervous system.
Well, we
There,
have quantum mechanics. Wait a minute, Ruth, because now we'd have to go down another rabbit hole and start
yeah,
talking about quantum mechanics
yeah,
and quantum theories and, fractals in that nature. And we should, because it is a part of it. But yes, we'll be here for a while studying, won't we?
you can't, but I think there's some valuable stuff that we need to consider. I'm not going to say make it the center of everything, but keep it on the side and say the Stecos are doing phenomenal research into hyaluronan. They're looking at aggregation of hyaluronan. They're using the T1 row system to be able to evaluate that. There seems to be an increase in hyaluronan and reduction in the aggregation of it once they've done fascial manipulation. So can we actually influence the ground substance itself? And that does make sense, and that does relate to neuroscience, because if you do have the densification, which Antonio Stecco actually says is a normal response, it can change. It doesn't mean you're definitely going to have fibrosis. But if we do have the possibility of changing the ground substance, then we have a reduction in the acidity, and the acidity is what sensitizes that 250 million sensory nerve endings as well. So there is an overlap. There are things that make sense. We just don't have the capability to actually say myofascial release or fascial manipulation or rolfing or whatever actually creates that change. We don't have that information. So it's going out there, being the amazing therapist, the person who communicates with their hands, their heart, their entire person with the client in front of you. But be aware that the language that we use when we discuss what we do needs to just be curbed a little bit. You're slightly different in the US. In the UK, we have advertising standards where we are not allowed to say a lot of the things that you can in the US. We have to be a lot more circumspect. We're not allowed to say myofascial release can treat back pain, myofascial release can treat plantar fasciitis. We're just simply not allowed to say that.
Do you mean treat or cure?
Treat. You're not allowed to infer that you treat any condition or label whatsoever.
Well, and here we go. So here, this is the thing, though, people, is that I think as a therapist, I don't treat a problem. I treat a solution. I'm the solution therapist, right? You're a solution therapist. You're not a problem therapist. So when people come to me for foot pain, I'm looking for hip problems that are causing a heel strike and a gait pattern to cause too much strain and actually cause either issues directed at the foot up the chain of the body, but one way or other, the nervous system is having a problem here, Houston, moving this spaceship forward, right? So I think that advertisement today in social media is corrupt. I think there's a lot of bullshit out there. I think, right, there's a lot of it scares me to think of so many people now just using ChatGPT. I think I could probably write a thesis project. Actually, I could just ask GPT to do it, right? Like, can you make me a thesis project on this? I probably could in like 5 minutes, whether or not it was true. Well, what can I tell you? But something's going to come out. So I think you're right. I think there is a lot of development here. I think that what's exciting is that there are pioneers and forefronters like you who are looking to not make this the thing or that the thing, but to try to bring it together. Because again, as a connective person, right, I feel like everybody in our community really is trying to connect the dots between things and to not be so, this is what's happening. I just think, do you feel better? If the answer is yes, I don't need a scientific research paper to tell me how you got there. but I think I have a good theory as to why touch is so valuable, is that it creates a sense of safety. It creates a sense of ease, and trusting your therapist to be on your side and help you along the way, I think is a huge piece of the process. As a client, not coming into your practitioner with an idea so stuck in your mind that it is actually the thing that limits the changes that you could make, is that you have a belief that you have to release your shoulder or unwind from your childhood trauma or whatever it is. If you come in with a preconceived notion that something is going to happen and this is what it is, you probably will actually stunt the whatever release, change, transformation you want to have in the process of working with a clinician. Am I right to say this, Ruth? This sounds so simple, right? So we can't go in with that. So Ruth, what are you doing? I know that you said you're going to Slovenia. And can you tell me a little bit, because guys, Ruth, I mean, if you want to get educated in hands-on therapies, here's somebody who could definitely help you along the way. Ruth, tell them a little bit about what you're doing and maybe any upcoming events that they should know about.
Yeah, I go off to Slovenia a couple of times a year. I've been really, really lucky over the last 20 years to have been invited to various different places around the world. I've taught myofascial release in Kuwait. I've been out to South Korea. Europe's a lot more accessible for me. So Slovenia is reasonably regular. So the group that I have in Slovenia is a group of physiotherapists, and I'm teaching them myofascial release. And it's very interesting for me because teaching outside the UK is very different to teaching inside the UK. And it's just purely because of the policy and guidance and the fact that we don't have private healthcare here. It's different. So that's the upcoming thing. And then we have our London workshops, which are normally our busiest workshops in the UK. They're coming up in November. And then we get a bit of a break until February. Try and stick with the school terms.
Well, I love that. Well, guys, hopefully at some point, Ruth, you and I'll have to come together and like do some sort of a workshop, little hands-on, little this, little belting, something there, something. I think there's going to be some awesomeness that's going to happen. Well, Ruth, I mean, as always, thank you so much for all of your insight and all of your dedication and work to answering this wonderful question of what is it that happens when we heal through touch? What is it that's creating the process? I think if we can get a harness on that, perhaps we can learn to self-soothe ourselves better and work our way back into healing all the time. Thanks again for being part of Anatomical Gangster. See you soon.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.